This is the Book Legion Podcast, where we review thought-provoking books to give our Legionnaires the knowledge they need to dominate the next level of their life.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining me on the Book Legion this week. This is your host, Tyser Evans. This week, I'm going to be covering David Goggins' new book, Never Finished. David Goggins has released another book that came out in 2018 called Can't Hurt Me. That was his first book he put out. It was a New York Times bestseller. I think it was a bestseller on every list possible. He got really popular after going on Rogan to promote that book, and it really since then has blown up. Before David Goggins blew up, what he did and what he had accomplished with his life was really remarkable. He's someone that grew up in Buffalo, right outside of Buffalo, had a really terrible, hard childhood, and it was full of abuse. Him and his mom fled to Brazil, Indiana, where he experienced a tremendous amount of racism. Ended up jumping into the military, having all kinds of trials and tribulations with the military. Eventually became the 36th Black Navy SEAL. And then after the SEALs, he started getting to ultra racing. So ultra racing is running 100 miles. I did a lot of ultras, and that a lot of that's covered in this book, some of his accomplishments and feats. But he's taken it one step further. He did set the world record for most pull-ups within a certain amount of time frame. I think it was like, I don't know, close to 4,300 pull-ups in like 48 hours or 72 hours, something absurd like that. And then David Goggins put out this new book, and his whole premise and the thing he talks about Rogan is that, he said it's, he would want to be the hardest man alive, the toughest man alive, right? And he has this thing, stay hard in all of his end of his videos. But really his core messaging is how to teach people how to build a really hard mindset, not to have a victim mentality, to realize you have always more in the gas tank. He talks a lot about this 40% mentality that SEALs use as a mantra, right? When you think that you've hit your 100%, that really you've only hit 40% of your potential, and you've got another 60% left in your tank. So he lives his life very hard. He's someone that does hard things every day intentionally. So he talks a lot about that you never know what life's going to throw at you. Oftentimes, a lot of us, we get in our comfort little bubble, right? We get in our comfort zone, and then boom, we end up getting fired. A pandemic happens, we lose our business, or we get an illness out of nowhere because we weren't staying in shape. We never changed our habits. And so Goggins is very much big on discipline, a lot like Jocko Willink, obviously who was a SEAL as well, but talks about this discipline is freedom type mentality. And he really goes out of his way to embrace what he calls the suck, to make sure that his life is full of pain. So when painful things get thrown at him in life, he has the mindset to be able to deal with it. And so this book Never Finished. So this book was much different than Can't Hurt Me. Can't Hurt Me was really a biography in my mind, a memoir. It was a lot about the things that he went through from the time that he was born, through his days as a SEAL and accomplishing the pull-up feat when he got into ultra. And that book was great because it allowed you to kind of get behind the curtain, understand what a man who's had to go through, washed out the first 2 times through Hell Week. He got through Hell Week his 3rd time. He went to Delta School. He did some special forces and the Air Force. So he's been through a lot of really intense training. But this book was different in the sense that, now he's in his late 40s. And the way that he views the world, I think, is a bit more with compassion and empathy for others and maybe even himself. But nonetheless, he also recognized that as he started to have some success, he maybe had, in his mind, started to take his foot off the gas a little bit. And he talks about this becoming a part-time savage in the book versus a full-time savage. But what I want to do here is I'm not going to cover like 3 chapters because really, the book has got several different chapters, I think 6 or 7, and then he has like evolutions, short chapters within the chapter, and there's about 8 or 9 evolutions that kind of run throughout the book that parallel with certain points in the chapter. The book's about 300 pages, really, really well written. I mean, it was really well written. I really enjoyed reading the book. I'm just going to talk to you guys about some of my favorite takeaways throughout the book and things that, I would say I read Can't Hurt Me right when it came out in 2018. But there are a lot of things in here that he shared that I wasn't expecting. I think he got a lot more raw and a lot more personal in this book and let you into his psyche more. Not so much, not that you can't hurt me that you didn't understand, but a lot of that was just like, I went through this and I overcame it, and this is how. This book was really saying, hey, this is happening and I feel fucked up and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to overcome this. I might be done. And he might have been done with running and living that kind of savage lifestyle. And it was interesting. I think he just got really vulnerable, which I really enjoyed, because I think sometimes these guys, we can't even relate, like a David Goggins or a Cameron Hanes, right? They're so intense and they're so extreme in what they do that they're so unrelatable to the average person. And in this book, you really got the sense that David is just an average person with a above average mindset that he has built himself, but he's built it consciously through discipline and through strategy, right? And it hasn't been an easy road. So one of the first biggest takeaways in chapter 2, and this is where the chapter is Merry fucking Christmas. And so he talks about, in this he does get really vulnerable too about his mother and some of the traumatic things that they went through and that she went through, and the way that kind of helped to shape him as a young man growing up. But Merry Christmas to him, he said, Christmas wasn't a day that he was ever excited about. Like, he never got Christmas presents. His mom was really poor when they moved to Brazil. They didn't have any money. They lived in a $7 a month apartment. And so Christmas was just another day. So in chapter 2, he also covers that he had an episode of AFib. And AFib is where you have a heart arrhythmia that can be very serious. And he has a really bad heart issue. And so he talks about, how to deal with these stressors, because through this heart issue, basically the doctors told him that he should really never do the ultras again, right? He should never run again. And that really became part of his identity. And so he talks, I'm going to read you this quote on page 54. No matter how badass and successful you think you are, trust me, there's a semi coming around a blind curve ready to smack you in the fucking mouth when you are comfortable as all hell. And so this happened consequently the day after Christmas. He ended up in the hospital. So, that's kind of based on the chapter. His experience as a kid, this happened to him where he thought that it was basically going to end his career. And it did for a part-time. And so he talks about the mindset that he went through, where he felt like he was starting to get comfortable compared to, again, us mortals who, don't go out and run a marathon before work like Cameron Hanes would. He really starts to drill in here that this is where you need to start doing things every day that are hard. Because if you start to embrace things that are hard, whether it's, running 10 miles a day, going for a killer workout in the morning, going to do cold therapy, whatever, it can even be meditating. Meditating is extremely hard for a lot of people. That you start to shape and callous your mind and such, so when life comes at you, you can slow down and take it piece by piece and come up with a strategy. Most of the time, people, when they get hit in the face, as he called it, get fucking slapped in the mouth or punched in the mouth, you typically react emotionally. And when you start to react emotionally, you make bad decisions, right? Which then usually compounds, making everything worse. And so he really starts to walk you through his mind of like having to recognize and realize, how am I going to start to live life moving forward, not having the identity I've always had? So I just enjoyed chapter 2. I know it's a quick overview, but of this, and he carries on this mentality every time something happens to him. It's like Merry fucking Christmas. Kind of in his mind, that means just like nothing ever happens or goes the way you plan in life, right? And so he kind of uses that as a kind of a fucked up analogy. And then on page 91, he talks about this ability to, a lot of us, we have these moments that are really crucial in life where you're faced with the challenge, you're faced with the problem, or you're faced with just like trying to get up and get out of bed to go to the gym. And there's these crucial seconds where you need to jump into action, because if you don't just jump into action and get after it, then you slow down and you start to rationalize why you shouldn't do that thing, or why you don't need to, or you look back at the accomplishments you've already done, and it allows you to stay in your little comfort bubble. And he says, we have to recognize that these crucial moments when we know that something is tough ahead, that it's important to look back and recognize of all the things that we've accomplished in our life, and that all of our experiences are finite. And so too many of us were scared about jumping into new realms where we get stuck in this comfort bubble of not wanting to get out of bed when it's cold outside, because shit, we can run tomorrow. Why run today? But knowing we need to run today because it's the best thing for us. And that there's those crucial moments, it's like a couple second gap, just jump into action, because that, again, that suck, that pain, again, starts to build resistance and callous your mind. But it also gives you the perspective that everything is finite, like I just mentioned. So no matter what you go through, you start to build up this resistance of looking back of all the things you've accomplished in your life. And you're like, yeah, man, that was really shitty for a day. That was really shitty for an hour. Maybe that was really shitty for a week, or maybe even a month, right? Or maybe even 6 months, maybe even for a year if you're opening up like a new business or something. But all experiences are finite. They all have a start date and an end date. And so the more that you can voluntarily put yourself through that and recognize that all experiences are finite, the more it encourages you to move forward and do things that are hard. And he had a really great quote as well, another thing I wanted to cover about being imbalanced, because oftentimes in society, we're kind of preached that you got to have this work-life balance. And I've, for the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, people have followed me online. I think it's important to recognize that there is no such thing as balance, and that's kind of what he talks about. So if you want to maximize your potential and become great in any field, you must embrace your savage side and become imbalanced, at least for a period of time. And that's exactly what I've talked about, and I was so happy he touched on this point. He talked about his training, right? The training he's done is so intense. It can be 6, 7, 8 hours a day that it can take away from a lot of the family time. You don't see people, friends, there's no leisure, right? There's no vacation. It's all about dedication. And so what I've always told people is to grade yourself on quarters. Now it's like give yourself a report card. There should be like 3 or 4 really core pillars of your life and things that are important to you, like your relationship with your spouse, right? Relationship with your kids, your family life, your finances, your work life, your leisure life. And to look at, okay, this last quarter, I was starting a new company or a new business, or the last 6 months, I went all in on work and I really kind of neglected my family and my friends and my personal life and my leisure life. It's okay to go all in and go 140% and disappear for a couple of months or 6 months, but then it's just to pull back and recognize that now maybe I need to scale back on the work end and pay attention to my family, because you only have a finite amount of time with them as well, and you don't want to be destructive to your relationship with your wife. And so too many of us are trying to do this balance and this jog of like hitting all pillars of our lives every single day or every single week to have it be balanced. And to me, there's no just such thing. If you're a highly motivated person, then you're going to be out of balance. And so he talks a lot about this through his training. And so I thought that was just a really crucial point. The 2 other things I want to talk to you about is one, the person in the book that was instrumental to him that he didn't talk about in Can't Hurt Me. Well, he talked about him very briefly. So when he moved to Brazil, Indiana, he moved in with his mom's parents for a bit, and his grandpa was it was in the Marines. He was in the military, and his name was Sergeant Jack. That's what he was called. And so Sergeant Jack is like a no bullshit guy. Like when they show up, he's just like, you're going to live in my house? Like you're going to earn your keep. Like this isn't going to be a free ride. You're not going to live here for free. So David automatically gets put to work. And this guy basically had a list of tasks that David had to do before school. And he talks about how he really resented his grandpa because, his dad was highly abusive to him and his mother. And so he was kind of looking for this warm father figure to embrace him and show him sympathy and empathy and love and compassion. And his grandpa was like, nope, your ass is up at 5 and you're doing this laundry list of chores. And he didn't realize that what Sergeant Jack or his grandpa was trying to instill into him was how to be a man and how to do it the right way and how to have character and conduct and take pride in your work. And he talks about how well this man kept his house and how well he kept his cars and how well he kept, his property immaculate. And over time, David starts to realize that there's so many lessons and teachings in that he actually starts to just go out and not have to be woke up. He talks about how his grandpa would throw cold water on him to get him up, or he would play loud music to wake him up. And he stopped having to do that. He started to recognize as a young man that there was a lot of power in owning, you're being a responsible person and taking pride and ownership in everything that you do and doing it to excellence. It's that old saying that Saban talks about, we practice perfect. And so, it's just really touching story. I want to get into a lot of it because I think it's a really powerful read in that section, that what life lessons he learned from Sergeant Jack and their relationship, especially as he got into the military and the things that he was able to accomplish in the military. But I thought it was so cool that he touched on this moment where he was looking for something that he didn't get, right? He was looking for this compassion, empathy. But in a lot of ways, he did get the lesson he needed to learn, how not to grow up to be a punk. And he talks about that as he was headed that way, sagging his jeans, trying to just get attention the wrong way. And he made this full pivoted switch and twist on how to embrace discipline, how to take pride and ownership in your work, and how to exceed expectations of what other people would think of you. And I think that those lessons that he learned from Sergeant Jack are really the reason why he is the way that he is. And then the last part of the book talks about how he did the Moab 240. So if you're unfamiliar with that, the Moab 240 is a 240-mile race through crazy mountains, I believe in Utah, and maybe it's Colorado. It's Colorado or Utah. So it's crazy elevation. And basically, he couldn't complete it. He had to drop out of the race because he got HAPE, which is high altitude pulmonary edema. It's basically where your lungs start to fill up with blood. But it's crazier before then. Like he ended up having a thyroid issue because he didn't pack his thyroid medication. He didn't pack the right type of gloves, and he has another condition where his hands basically just freeze and he can't use his hands. Then his pacer that was out running with him took him off course for like 15 miles. They had to run back off course. Then he develops HAPE. This is all in one race, right? And so he ends up having to check out, go back to the condo they had ridden, and he'd been in second place. And get on medication, see a doctor, and he basically rested for 24 hours, and he couldn't get out of his mind that he didn't finish. And despite the odds, and probably wasn't the best medical decision, he got back out on the track and finished the 240-mile race. He was disqualified, but he still, again, finish what you start. And that was so important. It was just going to eat him alive that he wasn't going to follow through on his commitment, what he had trained for, what he had set the expectation he was going to do for him and his team, right? And he got back out there and finished a 240-mile race, given all the complications and things he had to overcome in that time period. And I think that in particular, he really walks you through where he was mentally and how vulnerable he was with explaining how many times he wanted to check out, and he didn't want to do that. But then he walks you through when he was back in that warm condo, when he didn't have to complete. And everybody was like, you shouldn't be doing this because it's not medically safe, that he still got out there and went and did it. So that was a really powerful point of the story for me, how he was able to finish the Moab 240. And he talks about that, he had he didn't even allow him to cross the finish line because he was disqualified. So he made up his own finish line. It was like a telephone pole, right? I mean, I think it just says a lot about who he is and the type of mentality and the tools and gifts that he brings you in this book. And then the last thing he talks about is that he had some major issues with his knees from the amount of stress that he's had from this ultra running and through the military and all the other crazy shit he's done in his life. And so basically, I won't get into the details because you need to go read them, but he had a surgery that basically almost enabled him not to walk. And he had this goal of he was starting to really rebuild through the Moab 240, another 200-mile race he did in Florida. He built back this full-time savage, and then all of a sudden he's back full-on as David Goggins, rebuilt himself from part-time savage to full-time savage. Never thought he'd run again because of the AFib situation, back to doing 200-mile races. And he gets this knee surgery. Thought it was going to be a quick thing. Then it looks like he's not going to be able to walk. And so he had made a commitment he wanted to be a firefighter. Not just any firefighter, a wildlands firefighter, where they go out and they just get dropped in the middle of nowhere and fight these huge forest fires, but they usually parachute in. And so he talks about the mentalness of training for that with being in his late 40s. Everybody else in the class that's trying to become this is in their early 20s, and he's basically doing it on a leg that most people wouldn't be able to walk on. And if something happened to it, he would potentially not walk again. So he also walks you through that and how he was able to overcome that. And I thought it was so interesting because at this point in his life, he'd made a shitload of money off his book. He'd been on Rogan a bunch of times. He's getting speaking engagements all over the world that are paying him, probably one speaking engagement, what he would make in a year or two at the military. And he decides to go out and jump out of planes into fucking forest fires. And I just can't imagine most people when they get to that point, late 40s, you're making significant, probably 7-figure money, and you go take a job making like $35K with a bunch of young 20-year-olds where you're literally going to put your life on the line. It was just crazy. And he walks you through that whole training. And you also get to see how he grew, because it wasn't so much of like in Can't Hurt Me, talks a lot about how to be an uncommon man amongst uncommon men. And in this, he starts to really become a leader and help others build their mental mindset, as opposed to him just basically fucking with people mentally and going, yeah, motherfucker, you can't do what I can do. You can never be me. He starts to really have this paradigm shift of like, I'm the hardest motherfucker, but I'm also going to pull you up with me. And I thought that was a really beautiful way that he's grown as a human being, watching him over the last 5 years. So personally, a very long-winded book interview. I really enjoyed it. It's so hard to cover how much quality there was in the book and how well written it was. I really enjoyed it. I love that he just weaves in all these stories from like childhood, then it's back into the military, then maybe it's back to a story with his mom. And so you kind of get taken all over the book through story and life lessons that are built in. It's not like, hey, this chapter we're focusing on this life lesson. And it's just, he did a beautiful job of weaving the messaging through the stories, through the book. So I'll have this linked in the show notes below. If you guys are watching this on YouTube or listening, I would highly recommend it. If you're someone who's maybe struggling with mindset, or you're just trying to get to that next level, or you feel like you've been really lethargic, man, this book's going to fire you up. It's incredible for helping you to realize how much we underserve our own human potential. And so this week, for me, I'll tell you guys, after reading this book, here in Houston, it's never really cold, and it was low 30s every day this week. And so I went out and every day in the cold weather, and 3 of the days it rained, and I was out there in the 30-degree weather in the rain. Didn't go to the gym where it was warm. I could lift weights. I went and did cardio out there for about an hour and a half every day. And, because of the book, because I was just like, yeah, I can do this. I can embrace it. And these small victories set me up for when I go to work and I'm struggling, right? And growing a company, all the other things that I do in my life. So loved it. Again, it'll be posted in the show notes. If you guys haven't done so, please subscribe. I really appreciate it. Just hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Please share with 3 or 4 like-minded book lovers. Kevin and I put out a new book release, a book review every week. They come out typically on Saturday or Sunday. Every once in a while, Monday, if we're running a little bit behind. That's usually my fault. I do the editing. But thank you guys again for all the love and support, and we look forward to chatting with you next week.